Hi, everybody, and welcome to DocTalk. I am Dr. Erin Knopf. Dr. Hannon is out today, but we have a very special guest. One of our very own therapists, Bobbie Arthur, is joining us. Thank you, Bobbie, for being here.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
Oh, so excited to have you. If anything, we are talking about some really important stuff as a follow-up to our last Doc Talk, where we talked about lapses and relapses and how to notice them. Today, we're talking about relapse prevention plans. And I'm curious, you've had so much experience, Bobbie, especially coming from a higher level of care. How do you first introduce this concept to patients, their families, their outpatient teams, et cetera?
Well, I think if you are planning ahead, if you have a relapse prevention plan, your chances of staying out of a higher level of care are far greater. One of the things most people don't want to do that.
Yeah.
And so that's the part of them that is willing to engage in a relapse prevention plan. I believe that in the moment, it can be much harder to assess
Mm,
where you are if you haven't made some parameters in advance. For example, if I notice my behaviors are increasing, if I notice my weight is decreasing, if I notice that my binging is increasing, and knowing in advance what will I do if doesn't necessarily
mm,
mean you have to step up to a higher level of care. It means you catch it in a lapse instead of in a relapse. So it
totally.
means maybe I see my therapist twice a week, or maybe I see my dietitian twice a week, or maybe I make some change in my plan. But
Totally.
but the attempt
Yeah.
is to keep that from happening. And I think sometimes people get afraid that they're going to be told they have to do that, so they don't tell anyone.
Yes, yes. I think that's so real. Most people just see treatment as being an unwanted outcome of transparency, when really the more transparent someone can be with their closest supporters, their treatment team, whomever is overseeing their existence, the goal is to keep you in your life and not allow the eating disorder behaviors and thoughts and feelings to take that from you. And higher level of care is there for a reason if it's just too hard to overcome despite attempts. But it certainly is not the one and only option when you're on this journey. And I'm actually curious, when you think about a relapse prevention plan, are there any nuanced differences between what you would prepare for if you're stepping down from higher level of care and you've done a continuum of care versus maybe you're someone who's never been to higher level of care? Are there any differences between the two?
I think, not in my mind that are really dramatic. I
Yeah.
think that what's important in both instances is that you share it with your support network so that it's not just yours, but that prior to being in a place where you're worried, they are all on board with you. You identify them as supporters. And so, whether that's your team who knows this, or your family, or your partner, your loved ones, whomever it is that makes up part of your support system, that they have an awareness of what's in the recovery plan or prevention plan, and they're your teammate. They're not someone to hide this from. They're someone to lean into in those moments where you think, "Uh-oh, um, maybe I need to pay attention to this."
Yeah. I mean, no question, we talk a lot about motivation and willingness being essential components to this. Where do you see willingness showing up as really the catalyst for a prevention plan, a relapse prevention plan to work?
Well, that's a great question. It's a hard question, actually. I think there absolutely has to be willingness. I think as you go through a recovery journey, your ambivalence will show up. You will feel more willing at some times and less willing at other times. That's a normal part of the process. And so sometimes what it means is that you have to feel unwilling and lean into it anyway. Um, I think that's the function of the plan, is to say, I don't really want to do this, but look at this piece of paper. I agreed to do this. Um,
Mm,
and so, and I have my loved ones in my community that is going to help me engage in a lapse versus getting all the way to a relapse.
totally. So it's that willingness to check yourself and a willingness to let others check you as well.
And I also think that as you're putting the plan together,
Hmm.
it gives both you and your team and your loved ones a sense of where the holes are, a sense of where those
Mm,
places are that still feel tender or scary. And so willingness shows up to say, look, maybe I don't want to, I want to lose weight in my eating disorder brain, but I'm going to agree that I'm not going to let my weight drop. And these are the parameters we've set up. So it might be uncomfortable.
yeah,
And it might push on those very parts of you that we have to be paying attention to. It gives us a lot of
totally.
information.
Totally. Because, if anything we know to be true from doing work with these individuals, it's really hard to have a paradigm shift of any sort, no matter what your pathology at the time of diagnosis is. And to have your habits and your goals shift, it's not overnight. It is very, very gradual. And I love how you brought up that even in the process of creating a relapse prevention plan, it also gives opportunity for assessments for where the work must continue, because it's not going to be done just because you did a full continuum of care at higher levels. And it's not going to be done just because, oh, well, now you've checked the box, you met with a clinician. Cool, you're in recovery. No, not quite how it works. So I think
Not at
it's so
all.
cool hearing more about this opportunity, that not just having a relapse prevention plan, or having a relapse prevention plan is not only to create that safety net or bumpers on the bowling alley, but it also is still a tool to see where do we need to focus our time, our conversations, where do we need maybe more exposures, or different sorts of therapeutic interventions. It really is a working tool for someone's recovery.
Yeah, and my thought is that higher levels of care stabilize and they teach skills
Mhm.
and they set you up for outpatient, lower levels of care because you're in your life
Yeah.
and the stressors and the realities are not part of your life when you're in a higher level of care. They do show up when you're in a different level of care or lower level of care. So, if you have a fight with a partner and you know that that's your go-to response, or if have stress at work, it's a work in progress as
Totally.
in an outpatient setting, because that's where the real change is going to happen. Higher levels of care are really to get you back on track and to make a plan and to stabilize medically and dietarily.
Yeah, totally. If anything, that is one of the cool things about doing outpatient work, is it's really the longest chunk of time, or the longest space you'll be in as you're on the recovery journey, because it is that moment of applying what you've learned and actualizing real habitual changes. And if anything, the only thing consistent about being a human being is that life is inconsistent. And we know that eating disorder behaviors really do stem from a maladaptive coping response to intolerable feelings or things that are out of control. Everyone has a slightly different flavor, of course, but they can really be rooted in those main pillars. And life is messy. Life is complicated. Life does not go as we expect it to. And that is never more apparent than when you're in your life. When you're in treatment, yeah, you can ignore those emails, you can ignore those bills. You do not have to engage with Uncle so and so or Aunt so and so that usually trigger you. You are safe in a bubble. But outpatient is where all of these things can show up at any time.
Well, and I think, Erin, as you talk about accountability comes into this as well, and having a sense for yourself of what keeps you accountable,
Mm,
being able to, because because I think when you're an outpatient, there's nobody having a meal with you necessarily unless you arrange that.
Yeah,
So it's being able to say, maybe I need more support around this. And that can be a hard thing to do. Um,
totally.
it's a hard thing because in many ways it goes against what your eating disorder is telling you to do.
Yeah. I'm curious your thoughts on, let's say I'm a patient or a family member watching this, and, everyone wants to have a timeline. Everyone wants to know how long will I be in treatment? How long do you think people need a relapse prevention plan at their grasp?
Well, I think that so eating disorders tend to be a way to cope with difficult feelings and emotions. They
Exactly.
don't tend to, they are. And, and so, I think in life we have higher and lower times of stress. So, whether it's relationship stress or work stress or whatever it may be, I think, the position that the relapse prevention plan takes in your life, like for the first year, and maybe you can speak to that too, but for the first year, it's front and center. It's it's what you use to keep yourself accountable. And if you've been at it for a year and you feel like you're doing pretty well, you can move it maybe off to the side. It's still there, but it should never be something that gets put away, which is, I think, can be very hard for people. People don't want
Mm,
something like that following them around. But at the
yeah,
same time, I do think that, this is your way of coping with stress, and it's not a helpful way for your life and your body. And so it could be 5 years later. And the more you're able to keep that a lapse instead of a relapse, I think the better it goes overall.
totally. And to your point of, the first year, we know, at least from adult data, we think it could be shorter for adolescent patients because their brains are just rapidly developing and turning over cells all the time. But just to be on the conservative side, we say that you can only have cognitive improvements begin and start to be persistent if you have reversed any nutritional deficits and you've interrupted the weaponization of nutrition and maintained that for a year. Because that's really the only way to get out of famine mode, where the brain is still unsure if resources will be consistent and reliable. So it keeps everything kind of in this limbo phase of, I'm not sure if I want to change my processes around and risk not having enough energy reserves for what happens to this human being. And so it really does take that first year of hyper focus on really protecting someone's nutritional state and current status, and then knowing, okay, the cognitive improvements around rigid thoughts, fears related to food and body, the drives that motivated the eating disorder to begin with, that actually won't start improving until you're at the end of that year. And then it gradually improves every month, year thereafter. So this is a long journey, but it is a journey that works effectively. I always remind patients, like, there are plenty of conditions out there. And most people think when they hear the word remission, they think about cancer diagnoses, for example. This is one of those opportunities where we can say, with this treatment and extreme diligence, which is hard. At the end of the day, humans are humans. We're all humans. We're all capable of failing at our goals or failing at activities we're striving for. That doesn't mean we are failures, though. I want to add that. But this is really an opportunity where you can be in remission if you stick with it. The
Mm-hmm.
sticking with it is what keeps you on the trail.
I think that's a really good point. I think what couples with that is that you're trying to live your life either in a body that looks different or in without certain coping behaviors, and your mind in that year will keep saying to you, "Go back.
But
It's
what about this?
better over there. Go back. This isn't
Right?
right." And that's a really hard thing to reconcile when you're feeling it. but it's a normal feeling.
Totally.
Normalize that and know that, you know, you can still be in recovery and have hard days or have the wrong thoughts or, you know, have a day where you fall off the wagon, so to speak.
Hmm.
And that's all still part of recovery. It's noticing patterns that are going in the wrong direction.
Totally. I actually was just talking with a patient yesterday, and I think I've talked about this in previous videos. But one of my favorite metaphors for this journey, because some people say, "Oh, I'm in recovery" or "I'm recovered," and that always feels more like a finite endpoint or destination versus being in recovery is actually being on the journey of recovery consistently, and that can look different. So my metaphor is thinking of a highway, and you're heading south. So you're heading in a direction. You might change lanes. You might slip out of your lane, if you look away for a moment and you end up in the gravel or on the oh my gosh, the rumble strip. My kids love the rumble strip. Um, or maybe you've been driving a long time and you're feeling tired and you just want to take a pause or take a break. And you pull over on the side of the road and you take a nap. You are still pointing your car south. You have not gone north. So you're not actually out of a recovery mode. It's just at a different pace in that moment or with a different functionality or a different amount of progress allowed to you depending on the gear, the lane, etc. So that got extra wordy on that metaphor than I intended it to. But I think the more, people realize this is an ongoing commitment that is always improved, prognosis is always improved with maintenance of support, whether and that really is actually not whether, it's having either family, friends, chosen family. I always like to name that. It doesn't have to be your family of origin. Um, people you work with, and then your team. I know Dr. Hannon said it best. We are literally the most committed to your recovery of anyone. And it's not because you are a paying patient. It's because this is literally the work we do, the calling we have. This is what we're committed to. Your recovery and your experience matters most to us. And we are here to help make sure any threat to that is vanquished.
Well, and I think it's a constant balance
Hmm.
between having grace for yourself and keeping
I
yourself
love that word.
accountable.
Yeah.
Um, how do you personally, it's not going to look the same for everyone, which is part of why I think a recovery plan can be such an important tool, because we tend to fall on one side of the fence or the other at times, where you have no grace for yourself and you're just beating yourself up, or it's hard to hold yourself accountable. And so
Mm.
I think having that balance or finding that balance is part of what you need to be aware of um, in your plan. So what does that
Oh,
look like for
totally.
me?
I love that you brought that up because we know that that also is almost a core characteristic of everyone struggling to stay in recovery is they usually speak to themselves meaner than they would talk to any other human being on the planet. They have a set of expectations, usually around perfectionism, that again would not hold anyone else to that standard at all.
Mm-hmm.
The amount of times I hear people say, I just didn't want to disappoint you. I didn't want to admit that I, had lost weight or wasn't able to keep up with my meal plan. And I actually just this morning said, because the patient said, I just want to be able to hear you're doing a great job. And I looked at the individual and I said, you're doing a great job because you're showing up,
Mm-hmm.
because you're being transparent, because you're admitting where it's been hard. No one's expecting this to be, a perfect journey where everything happens the right way. That would be not a disorder, I guess, at all. So it
Mm-hmm.
really is, again, how you show up for yourself and how can you make sure you give yourself that grace and space to be you with all your flaws, with all of your gifts, because we all hold both. Just as we have a hard time tolerating negative emotions have an important place in our life just as much as positive emotions. Negative thoughts have an important place in our life. Usually that's what makes people successful, right? And you got to keep it in check though.
Yeah, our emotions just inform us.
Mm,
They don't hurt us, but they inform us. They're uncomfortable.
yeah, so
And, I
uncomfortable.
think they're very uncomfortable. And so a lot of this is about tolerating discomfort and knowing that you're going to be okay. And I hear so often patients say, well, I messed up in the morning, so I just said, never mind. And then I just messed up for the day. And the question is not what happened, it's what happened next. So,
Mm,
okay, you messed up. What happened the next day? What happened after that? What happened the day after that? How did you resource to get yourself back to where you need to be? So it's not, oh, I fell off the wagon. It's, and then I was able to get back and do what I needed to do. That's where the energy is. It's knowing that you might have a bad day, but you have the skills and resources to bring it back to center. Um, all of us show up in ways I think that we wish we didn't. And the goal is to be able to kind of come back to our center or our place where we embrace it, we use the skills, and we do what we know we need to do. So
yeah.
I love to let people know that, okay, so that happened. Then what happened?
Yeah, like how do we look ahead? How do we analyze what happened after that, as the real source of information on how are we doing? I love that. If anything, I also love the acknowledgement that we all err as human beings. We are, again, really imperfect creatures. Maybe that's why so many of us are driven to perfection. I'm speaking from personal experience as a type A doctor. But I was just thinking about the translation of, in today's parenting guidance, it's all about you don't have to be a perfect parent. Do you know how to repair with your child, though, if you did err? So if you lost your SHIT and you yelled at your kid, can you own that and demonstrate modeling that you're apologetic, you want to be different? Can you acknowledge how you may have made someone feel? And I just really, in this moment, was like, what if that was something we did for ourselves, where we could acknowledge to ourselves, I mistreated you in that moment. That's not what I intended to do, but I kind of lost my cool. One, do you forgive me? Two, can you trust that I'm constantly trying to improve and be better? Like that just, whoo, what an opportunity and what a thing that we all deserve. As much as our interpersonal relationships deserve our accountability and our authenticity, so do we with ourselves. And it's okay to slip.
Mhm.
Doesn't mean you're falling.
That's where the grace comes in, I think.
Mm, mm.
I think
Grace and space.
and just knowing that and perfectionism, as you know and I know, is a big part of what can live with this disorder. And
Totally.
so being able to say none of us are actually perfect, and the idea of perfection is sort of an illusion, and it's a way to keep us frustrated and it's a way to keep us always running after something. And so you won't have a perfect recovery. No one does. Um, and there will be harder days than others, but that doesn't mean you're not doing it right.
Totally. And your relapse prevention plan might need to be adjusted over time to meet your needs as necessary. So there is no such thing as a perfect relapse prevention plan either. It is simply, again, finding safety measures to put in place, flags to name objectively and obviously that improve the accountability, as you were talking about before, and the ability for everyone to stay cued in to where you are on your journey.
And I think the stronger your system is outside of you and the more willing you are to use that system when you need it. I mean, part of what I also know is that when you're struggling, most people with eating disorders tend to pull in. because their
Mm,
eating disorders, their most reliable resource. And
yeah,
in that moment, you almost have to like, it's like opposite action. When you want to pull in is
yeah,
when you need to reach out, is when you need to lean in versus pull back.
totally, totally. It's so interesting, and just to drop more, psychological motivations here. Maladaptive coping strategies feel good and feel functional because they feel good when they are familiar. And our brains hate anything that is unfamiliar. So really reminding yourself too that using a relapse prevention plan with all of the pieces in place is gonna feel awful at times because it
Mhm.
is unfamiliar and new, and newness freaks our brains out beyond anything else. That's just where our evolutionary wiring, unfortunately, gets in the way of us actually living fulfilled, huge lives. So yeah, it's so interesting. We've now come up to this a couple of times of how do you tolerate the intolerable or the just uncomfortable. So not only in your own body or in your thoughts, but also in your habit shifts and your reliance on other supports. All of that is going to feel uncomfortable, and yet all of it will be protective, truly, in the end.
That's the
Right?
$10,000 question as humans.
Oh,
Um,
oh,
because life is uncomfortable sometimes.
yeah,
And, the more we feel safe and trust ourselves to ride it through, instead of avoid it, um, the more we're going to be able to engage with life in a way that feels gratifying.
totally. And developing that trust really, again, because our brains are so dang, concrete, is through the experience. You have to have experiential evidence of, oh, I did do something hard, or I got through that. And I think I'm still intact. So,
Mhm.
okay, maybe I can do this. I think that's what's hard when people haven't yet had that learning opportunity. It just still feels like this threatening, looming darkness in front of them. But yeah, a relapse prevention plan is like
Mhm.
a flashlight.
And knowing what your particular coping skills are
Hmm. Yeah.
and practicing them before you need them.
Right? You have to, just like when we get on an airplane, they review what to do in an emergency situation. How many of us have actually ever been in an emergency situation on a plane? I think I've had one, but never one that required an emergency exit or anything like that. But that's because the more you're prepared and the more you have it memorized almost of look for your nearest exit, keep your seatbelts buckled, you actually will know what to do when your brain is on fire and something is really terrifying around you. Yeah,
Absolutely.
you got to set it up when things are calm and chill. Practice it when things are calm and chill so you can use these skills when you're not calm and chill. Yeah. Oh gosh, always so much fun just talking with you and going through all of these nuances. If anyone has questions about relapse prevention plans, feel free to message Bobbie or I at any time. But thank you for joining us for Doc Talk. I'm Dr. Erin Knopf, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.